Welcome to episode 20 of The World This Week, Luring Russia into War. This week, is NATO provoking direct conflict with Russia? Kiev in the crosshairs, and Trump's three-ring circus on Iran. I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. Is NATO provoking a direct war with Russia? To discuss this, as our guests today are Scott Ritter, the former U.S. Marines counterintelligence officer and chief UN weapons inspector, and Ray McGovern, former CIA, Soviet, and Russia analyst and briefer of presidents and Henry Kissinger. Welcome back, gentlemen. Scott,
Thank you.
let me start with you. Through a whole series of events, reneging on promises not to expand NATO, the 2014 coup in Kiev, the civil war launched against ethnic Russians in Donbass who resisted the coup, sanctions to weaken Russia, failure to implement the Minsk Accords, rejection of treaties Russia proposed to change the security architecture of Europe, even though Russia warned it would take technical military means if these proposals were rejected, and preparations for a new coup government offensive against Donbass. The U.S. and NATO provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 in order to launch an economic, information, and proxy war against it. Right afterward, Joe Biden said the sanctions had never been meant to prevent an invasion, and he and Boris Johnson publicly called for the overthrow of Vladimir Putin. That still seems to be NATO's goal. In the same way that NATO provoked Russia's invasion in 2022, is NATO, having lost the proxy ground war and now launching a drone and missile war deep into Russia, is NATO now trying to provoke Russia to strike back at a NATO country in order to justify a direct NATO war against Russia with the aim of defeating it? British and German generals tell their citizens to prepare for war with Russia by 2029. Is this what NATO is trying to do, Scott?
I don't think NATO actually wants Russia to strike it because that would put the conflict into a completely different realm. What NATO is doing is acting on the belief that Russia is bluffing and that Russia won't, unnecessarily escalate. And this is the trap that NATO has set for Russia, the European Union, and the United States. Remember, it was Lloyd Austin that came back from a visit to Kiev back in May of 2022 and articulated that the strategic goal of the United States in this proxy war was the strategic defeat of Russia. The strategic defeat of Russia isn't the embarrassment of Vladimir Putin. Strategic defeat means just that. It's the collapse of the Russian government, the end of Vladimir Putin's reign as president of Russia. It is precipitated by economic calamity, which the West was trying to provoke through stringent sanctions, and military, if not defeat, at least a military complexity, meaning that Russia would be denied a rapid victory through the infusion of hundreds of billions of dollars worth of equipment and training in a program that had little regard for Ukrainian life. I mean, this wasn't about preserving democracy. This was always about executing the George Soros plan of 1993 to find a Eastern European proxy that would provide the manpower for NATO to go to war with Russia. And that's what this is. This is literally a NATO war with Russia using Ukrainian manpower. The goal has always been not defeating Russia on the battlefield. They can't. The goal has been to precipitate the collapse of Russian society. We saw this play out in June of 2023 with Yevgeny Prigozhin's mad rush towards Moscow. In the lead up to his decision to do this, the Ukrainian intelligence services and the British intelligence services were in contact with Prigozhin. And one of the contacts that he used was Mikhail Khodorkovsky, I believe, the billionaire oil man who defected or went to prison, then was released, went to England, and now runs basically a proxy operation on behalf of MI6. He maintains connectivity with business contacts in Russia. And Prigozhin was led to believe that the business community would rise up and welcome him. That if he made a move on Moscow, he would be met with open arms, and that there would be a Moscow Maidan moment that brought down Shoigu, Gerasimov, and the Siloviki. Putin would, of course, not be touched because he's Putin, but he would be basically neutered and eventually removed from power. This was the goal. This is what the West has always wanted. They failed in 2023, and they are working to achieve this goal and objective today. This drone war is sort of a sleight of hand thing because, let's take a look at what NATO has done. In 2024, August, NATO invaded Kursk. I mean, Kursk, of all places. Belgorod, right outside of Belgorod, is the big tank battle. They invaded it. They butchered hundreds of Russian elderly who could not evacuate. They butchered them. They raped 80-year-old women. They filmed it. And then they push in. It's a very provocative attack. And it was a test for Russia. What would Russia do? Well, the Russian response was to counterattack and over time kill 80,000 Ukrainians. Okay, they recaptured Kursk. But what appears now is that Russia failed the test, because then they follow up with Operation Spiderweb, a British MI6 operation to put drones on mother trucks, park them, have the drones fly off and strike Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. This should have precipitated a massive Russian response. It didn't. Russia's response was to ride it out and continue to focus on the conventional battle. And now we have a situation where Russia has been fighting battles in Pokrovsk, forgetting anyways, there's some major battles taking place in the Donbass, in Zaporizhia, etc. And Russia's winning. They're winning these. But what the Ukrainians are doing is counterattacking viciously, throwing manpower wave after wave after wave. And they create this propaganda that, Russia's losing ground. Well, that's just a unique way of referring to a gray zone that it's designed for toing and froing. And if the Ukrainians want to put 20,000 troops into a gray zone and have them all die, Russia's more than happy to let them do that. But it creates the perception that Ukraine has counterattacked, that Ukraine has recaptured territory, that the Russian offensive isn't going as well as it is, even though it's going very well. And it's all this mental game to get Russia focused on the battlefield. And this is what Vladimir Putin has been doing, focusing on the battlefield, focusing on maintaining diplomatic relations, and he's left himself a soft underbelly. One, the economic aspect of it. The Ukrainians have been working with the British for some time now to develop drone capabilities. And it's like anything when when you start putting pieces together, or anything of a puzzle, you can start throwing pieces in there and you don't have anything looking. But at some point in time, the image starts to coalesce. You start to see the image, and then sooner or later, all you need is a few pieces, and there it is. This is what the British drone campaign has been. It's been a bunch of disparate actions where they have started something, the Russians respond, they start something else, the Russians respond, they start something else, the Russians respond, and they just keep pushing red line after red line after red line after red line. They run drones through the Baltic corridor, strike St. Petersburg, Russia does nothing. They run drones through Kazakhstan, strike Russia does nothing. FP5s built by Britain, brought in, violating the basic tenet. Reagan has talked about this over and over again, how Russia said, we will not allow NATO ballistic missiles operating from Ukrainian soil. Well, today there are NATO missiles built by Britain, the FP5, operating from Ukrainian soil, striking Vodkin, striking strategic targets. And then they just keep the pressure building up and up and up and up. And what happens is you start to wear down the Russians psychologically. And this is where we're at right now. There's a very deep psychological game going on. In the south, in Zaporozhye and Kherson, the highway that connects Crimea with the Donbass, I forget the number, M84 or something of that nature. You used to be able to drive on it. I've driven on it a couple times. I remember the first time I drove on it, we were told that we're going to be driving very fast because every once in a while a drone leaks through, but there was fog and we got through. But today, the Ukrainians now are going in and they're interdicting this thing. They're sending drones into Crimea, interdicting fuel tanks. They're creating a crisis, a psychological crisis. And the Russians haven't responded. The Russians have just focused on the trap. They were lured into this conventional battle trap, and the British and the Ukrainians are playing a completely different game. And this June, they're going to swamp Russia. The goal is to bring in, millions of drones, as you said, millions of drones. including up to 20,000 heavy drones. Zelensky's talking about 6,000 drones a day striking Russia at the peak capacity. The question is, what is Russia going to do about this? It appears that Russia has made the decision that they recognize the threat. And so they're going to begin a campaign, or so they say, of taking out decision-making centers, defense industrial centers, all related to the drones. But the fact is, this is part two of the trap. Because if the Russian response is limited to Ukraine, they're missing the point that all the drones are made outside of Ukraine. And there's logistic corridors to bring the drones into Ukraine. So while Russia's blowing Ukraine up, the drones are still being made, being brought in, and continuing the fight. And they're hoping the Ukrainians and the Brits are really starting to get confident that something's going to happen in Russia, that there's going to be some sort of breakdown. I think they're wrong. I think they're overly optimistic. I think people have always underestimated Russia's ability to absorb pain and to react and to stay the course. And I believe Russia will stay the course. But things are going to get pretty messy this summer. I think it's going to reach critical mass, and something's going to give. And I think what's going to give is Ukraine, and I think what's going to give is Europe. Russia doesn't want to attack Europe, and Europe doesn't want them to attack Europe. But they've pushed Russia to the point where we're going to see extraordinarily destructive strikes on Ukraine. And if Europe continues to provide the means to strike Russia to Ukraine, I believe it's inevitable that Russia will attack Europe this summer. It's not because Europe wants them to, because now we're heading in a direction that Europe can win. There is no European conventional military power. So once Russia figures out this drone campaign thing and comes up with the answer, when Russia strikes Europe, as Russia will strike Europe, Europe has no conventional response. None. There's no conventional military going to be for. Their air force is a joke. They have no missiles. Even if they start building long-range strike missiles, they don't have enough. Russia outmatches them, and it would lead to the total devastation of Europe. Through conventional power, Russia has learned from the Iranian playbook that you don't need nuclear weapons. and they will rain death and destruction down on Europe like Europe's never seen. All you tourists who have tickets to Paris and Berlin, go early and then get the hell home. Because if they keep doing this, there's going to be a general war this summer. You're muted.
Yeah.
We're not saying you're crazy, Joe. It's just that you're muted.
No, I was just doing a mime this time. I thought I'd do it by mime, but okay, I will ask you, Scott, if Russia is not bluffing and they do hit Europe, how does Europe respond then? If they don't have conventional,
they have no response. They have no response. What will happen, I believe, is the blowback will be that Europe collapses. When the European civilians wake up, you could do this all you want. When Germans wake up and find Russian missiles blowing the living dog shit out of German cities, they're going to hold their government to account. Right now, Germany's published a master plan that talks about the creation of a 400,000 plus military, except they acknowledge nobody wants to join. Nobody wants to fight for Germany. 60% of German men of military age have said that even if Russia invades Germany, they're not going to join the fight because they don't believe in Germany. They don't believe in what the German government is. Now, these people are being taken down a path where they have no say. Nobody's asking them about what's going on in Ukraine. And if this thing blows back and Germany blows up, and then they're confronted with the inherent weakness of Germany, meaning Germany can't respond, this is where I say you're going to be looking at governments collapsing in Europe, not through revolution, but through the loss of confidence of the people. And this is the fact. No European nation in terms of the collective people is ready for a war with Russia. If Russia goes to war with Europe, it's going to be because the Russian people are 100% ready for war with Europe. There's a big difference between a nation that has its people mobilized in support of something and a nation that has the people disbelieving that it's happening.
Ray, I want to get to you, but I need to follow this up with Scott.
No
Europe may have no response, but the United States does, and that would be an attack on a NATO country. There would be enormous pressure on Trump from Congress, people like Lindsey Graham, from his cabinet, certainly from the media and from the Europeans to do something if Russia hits. Trump is no fan of NATO. What would the U.S. do in your view if Russia hits?
Well, I mean, again, it's a fair question. It's an untested thesis. What is Article 5? Does it work? Especially in a situation where the United States knows about the provocations against Russia. Marco Rubio has acknowledged, Donald Trump has acknowledged that NATO expansion precipitated the current crisis. And Trump, I believe, said something earlier this week to the effect of, if you Europeans provoke Article 5, we're not going to come to your assistance. He's talking about pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany. He's delayed or postponed or blocked the rotational deployment of 4,200 Army soldiers to Poland, the heavy brigade rotation. You know, and then the other thing is the only thing the United States could bring, because we didn't have sufficient conventional military power. A couple brigades is not in this day and age. So we didn't have ground forces. The only thing he had was air power, and air power was just exposed to be a myth over Iran. So there's no intimidation factor now. Nobody's going to be talking about how NATO air power is going to come in with long-range strike weapons and take down the Russians. That's been proven to be a myth. So the United States will be confronted with its own impotence. We don't have anything, and then we come to the ultimate. Um, if Europe does something stupid, what I'm more concerned about is France and England, who've come together with this nuclear pact, and now they're playing stupid games, such as France going to send nuclear capable Rafale fighters to Finland, so they can specifically threaten the Kola Peninsula and Murmansk. I mean, come on. And then the Brits are talking about extending into Germany. Everybody's talking about potentially extending into Poland, and now we have people who are, in the past have been deemed to be a little bit too conservative, a little bit too reactionary. People like Sergei Karaganov, who have said, in June 2023, famously postulated that the United States will not trade Boston for Poznan. And that's an untested thesis. I wouldn't want to test it. I think it's irresponsible to speak of testing it. But what happens if the Brits decide that if let's say Russia does hit Poznan with a nuclear weapon, they take out Belgorod on the belief that Putin's bluffing, and Putin's not bluffing, and that triggers a general nuclear war, which Europe will immediately lose. And then what does the United States do? Is they watch Europe go up into a nuclear holocaust, knowing that the Russians are right there on a hair trigger. Do we back down? Do we seek to exploit? This is the dangerous aspect of this: is that the American weakness is actually a bad thing at this point in time, because it creates windows of opportunity for people like Sergei Karaganov, who does have influence in the Kremlin, to say we need to call the West bluff. We need to assert ourselves. But the point, I just wrote something. I call it the Karaganov fallacy. Hopefully it gets published soon. But the fallacy is this: nuclear deterrence right now is premised on the notion that nuclear wars can't be won, therefore they should never be fought. I mean, that's a 2020, January 2022 statement by the 5 major nuclear powers. Nuclear wars can't be won, therefore they should never be fought. The Karaganov corollary to that is nuclear wars can be won, and we will use nuclear weapons, because that's what he's saying. We can win a nuclear war against Europe by preemptively using nuclear weapons. This changes nuclear deterrence all along, because once one nuclear power embraces this doctrinal new paradigm, all nuclear powers have to embrace it. And once one nuclear power uses a nuclear weapon, that's a demonstrated willingness to use. And the only way you deter that is to show your own demonstrated willingness to use. So the United States strikes Tehran. And now what? It's lunacy. It's crazy. It's insane. It has to be stopped. I'm heading to St. Petersburg in a couple of days, and I can promise you this is an argument I'm going to be making in front of the Russian people, that this notion of, okay, I know we can't trust America. Nobody can. America negotiates in bad faith. Yes, we do. But you have to understand that this chaotic environment we have with no arms control is going to kill us all, because it creates an opportunity for people to say silly things like nuclear wars can be won, therefore we will use nuclear weapons. That is a suicide pill, and it has to be stopped. And the only way we stop it is re-embracing strategic nuclear arms control.
Ray, you've been patiently waiting. You have the floor to respond to any or all of this.
Well, I agree with Scott that the pressure on Putin is growing day by day to do more aggressive things. Karaganov, well, actually, the same day that the college, the vocational teacher school in Luhansk was struck, and I think it's 24 uh, young people, prospective teachers, were killed, 18 of them young women. Karaganov says, look, for God's sake, nice to make rhetoric, but you have to go after the Europeans, not just the Ukrainians. The Europeans, that's what you got to go after. Okay. So he's a strong voice. Putin listens to him. Putin has let him actually conduct Q&As at Valdai. Whether Karaganov's going to have the last word, I don't know. Putin has got to think this over, and the only indications we have about how he thinks is what he says. And what he said just yesterday in Astana, in Kazakhstan, was really interesting. Somebody said, "Hey, have you heard about the Russian drone that crashed into an apartment building in Romania?" Now, here, this was atypical of Putin. He looked tired. He looked irascible. He looked like he had just come from an hour and a half with Lukashenko of Belarus, and actually, that's exactly where he came from. Okay. So he says, tell me about this thing. I don't know anything about it. I just heard about it on the way in. And somebody says, well, they're saying that this missile that hit, that this drone that hit the building in Romania was a Russian drone. And he says, who's they? Who's they? And it's all the Europeans. He says, that's not they. I want to know names. Who's they? So he's really kind of worked up about this. And so Ursula von der Leyen, oh, well, he says, now, has Ursula von der Leyen been there? Has she inspected? No, she hadn't. Okay. Well, look, let's be calm. Let's find what we can from the debris. Let's examine the missile if we can, just like we did when the Ukrainians shot a drone into one of my presidential residences near Valdai. Remember that? Okay. We collected the parts, including the command control thing, and we very clearly, openly gave it to the American attaché in Moscow. And we said, now take a look at this. You could find out who programmed this. And, now that happened, well, months ago. I haven't had any reaction from anybody, but Putin refers to that. He says, look, you could do these things, you can find out where it came from and so forth. So that was what he said about that. Now, when he was asked about Latvia, how about Latvia? Now, and they referred to this very odd public report by the PR part of the SVR. The SVR is the CIA equivalent. I knew the CIA has a PR division. I didn't know the SVR had put out statements now and then. Maybe I just missed them. But they were very clear in saying, look, we know that the Latvians have been told by the Ukrainians, look, you guys can give us 5 bases in Latvia from which we can fire these drones and missiles, and the Russians will never know where they came from. and then the Russians say, chalk this up to extreme Russophobia or a lack of critical thinking. But we've told them, we know where they come from. We have the coordinates. We have the coordinates of decision-making bodies in Latvia. And final sentence, this is from the Russian intelligence service, okay? Final sentence is, please don't make the mistake of thinking that membership in NATO will make you immune to appropriate retribution. Whoa, okay. So that was the marker put down 11 days ago by the SVR. What did Putin say yesterday? Was asked about that. He said, you mean the Latvia that they shoot these things from Latvia? Well, that would be not only crazy, but it would be an act of war. What's the word he used? He said it would, it'd be illegal. I forget the word, but he said, look, it will be illegal. It would be tantamount to requiring retribution, and there would be retribution. Now, most people think, of course, well, a NATO country then would be hit, Latvia. Russia has lots of ways to get back to Latvia, short of ostentatiously hitting them with a missile that might that might make a very mercurial president invoke Article 5. And I think, I've said before, call me Pollyanna, but the way I look at Putin, and maybe it's just projection, if I were in his position here, and I had built up my country for 25 years to what it is today, and I'm winning in Ukraine, and I have this cost-benefit analysis. Would it make sense to take even if it's just a 10% risk that Trump would go off half-cocked and we'd get involved in a nuclear exchange? No, I don't need to do that. And I think that's where he's coming at this. And I hope I'm right. Who knows whether I'm right? I've been wrong before, as most people know. So that's how I look at it. In other words, he's laying down a marker. He says, this is going to stop. But I think the pressure from people like Karaganov can be resisted, the more so because they're winning in Ukraine. Last thing here, he was also asked at this press conference, now, what did you mean when you said you're winning in Ukraine? What did he say here? He said, look, I'm thinking about the situation on the ground. Uh, that's what I'm thinking. We're proceeding he says, in all directions, but he means we're proceeding in a westerly direction, and we don't need this extra stuff. Lastly, but not least, the Russians are building up their defenses. It's a big. If the Ukrainians shoot as many drones as Scott says they're capable of doing, that's going to be a real challenge. But the other part of it is the Ukrainians have no air defense. So, in my view, if the Russians can obliterate the Ukrainian manufacturing and drone firing spots with impunity and with great ease, then, with these firing spots gone, even if these drones are coming in from other countries, they won't be very, very handy if they can't be fired from the pre-positioned spot. So that's where I'm coming from. But you've heard most of that before.
Yeah, Putin was also asked about a statement from the Latvian foreign minister that that they could use drones to hit and flatten Russian air bases in Kaliningrad. To which Putin said, "Well, whoever does that, we could flatten theirs as well." So, what I want to know is, do you agree with Scott that NATO doesn't want to be hit, and they're not trying to provoke Russia to hit a NATO country in order to invoke five and have the direct war with Russia that the Europeans seem to want?
Um, no, I agree with Scott. The Europeans are pretty hard to diagnose. Putin's attempt to explain it after calling them, in effect, crazy, is to refer to people making lots of money with the military-industrial complex. And as soon as that continues, as long as people, as he put it, take money out of the pockets of the citizenry and make this thing continue, and by implication, stay in power, Merz, Macron, Stormer, um, then that's as much explanation as can be made, because these people have to realize, as Scott has already said, there is no more NATO. There is no more Article 5 that people can really rely on. Even so, I think Putin would be very, very cautious, other than very cautious lest he risk Trump rising to what the West Europeans might want and threaten invoking Article 5. The Article 5, of course, requires other members to spring to the defense through an orderly parliamentary process if one is attacked. And that was invoked by the U.S. during 9/11, and the Europeans came to our defense.
Yeah. I remember seeing the German fighters flying over Manhattan. So, Ray, one other thing about you said Latvia, if they
You're
threaten
joking about the German fighters, right?
no, no, I'm not. There were
Yeah.
German fighter planes up there. So,
Were there?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yes, I know. So it was. Well, I'll have to double check that, but that's what I recall. It was 25 years ago now. You said that the Russia can get back at Latvia without striking Latvia. Just you have some ideas about how they could do that?
Well, you can bet that Latvia is riddled with agents of influence and spies and all kinds of sabotage things. Latvia is not all that powerful. As I say, there are other ways that those people could be dealt with. Uh, the Russians like to avoid this kind of thing. Lately, there haven't been any mokria dela, which means mokri is moist or wet matters, wet affairs, which they call covert action of the kind we indulge in. But it's sort of an academic question because, in my view, and I may be wrong on this too, I may be, that Latvians have taken the message. There's even some hints in Latvian media now that they know they have come to their senses. They're no longer being Pollyannish about Russia not being able to determine where Ukrainian drones or missiles are fired from.
Scott, we have heard a couple of days ago now from Russia that foreign diplomats should leave Kiev because there are going to be devastating attacks against decision-making centers. There was a report, I can't remember the Russian official, who said they wouldn't hit the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, or Zelensky's office because there are only some cleaners in there and a security guard, and Zelensky's in a bunker. So they're not going to hit the presidential office or the Rada, but they will hit supposedly other decision-making centers in Kiev. When do you think is this still on the cards? And when do you think this might happen?
Well, I think it's on the cards. It's curious. For 2 days now, sources that in the past have been accurate, who, for instance, receive information about the Russian strategic air bases, the deployment of Tu-95 bombers with KH-101 missiles uploaded, Tu-160s with KH, and they say, okay, the bombers are there, they're going to be flying tonight. So for 2 nights now, these sources are saying we expect the bombers to fly. Well, there's no doubt in my mind the bombers are there. There's no doubt in my mind that KH-101s have been uploaded on them. But look, the Russians have said that this isn't a show. This isn't a demonstration. When they strike, they're going to kill. That's why they gave advance notice. This is very serious. It doesn't mean they're targeting diplomats. What they're saying is that when we strike, we're going in to kill. And if your diplomats are near a facility, because I think there's an indication that what many of the people we call American diplomats are American military and intelligence, facilitators who oftentimes, liaise with their Ukrainian counterparts in underground command and control bunkers. I think the Russians are saying we're going to kill them. In the past, we may have held off just out of respect, but when we decide to strike, we're going to kill. But here's the thing: when we decide to strike, they're not going to bomb an empty building. They're not going to bomb an empty bunker. The weapons they're getting ready to bring to bear are very expensive weapons, and they will use them to effect. The other thing that happens is, all right, so you see, okay, the bomber goes out, everybody goes to their bunker, and then nothing happens. Well, they got to get out of the bunker sooner or later. They got to move around. They can't think, or people have to resupply the bunker. Things have to happen. And I just think that the Russians are playing a giant mind game right now, because what they're doing is they're collecting what is known as pattern of life intelligence. People went underground. Where are they? How are they rotating in? Are they rotating forward? Where, and once they get a pattern of life and they have certainty on the locations and who's in the locations, then they will strike, and they'll strike decisively. One of the things that happens, I think, when people go underground, we saw this in Iraq. The Iraqis would go into a hide site or something, and if we inspectors didn't inspect, they got cocky and said, "Oh, they don't know we're here." No, we knew you were here. We're just watching, And I think that's what the Russians are doing right now too. They're very effective intelligence. They're playing mind games with. There's no timeline here. The Russians, I think, want to make sure that when they strike, it's a very decisive strike that sends an absolute ripple effect through the entire system. the last thing Russia wants to do is do a big sound and light show and have nothing happen. They're not doing demonstrations anymore. I think they're, firing for effect. And so it'll happen on a timeline dictated by the Russians and nobody else. They don't care that the internet is frustrated. They don't care that Telegram channels, Z bloggers are like, why aren't they striking? They don't care that the Ukrainians are like, where are they? The Russian leadership doesn't care. The only thing they care about is when they launch, that they hit what they're aiming at, and what's in what they're aiming at dies. That's it.
But Putin
Yeah, let me
can't. Go
interject,
ahead.
just reflect back 1 week when, as we spoke, Scott, you had some sort of subliminal information, or maybe you got it from another part of your screen, that the attack, the retaliation for the strike on that college was actually starting. And indeed, you were right, it did start. And that was the retaliation. It was not only Reshnik, but as other very sophisticated, as you point out, very pricey, very expensive weapons. What struck me about that is that all the Western press was saying, well, now they're killing a whole bunch of civilians. The people in Kiev are all going to get obliterated. Well, actually, the Ukrainians said that 19 people were killed in that strike, several others injured. I mean, if you compare that to the 21 young teacher people wanting to be teachers in Lugansk, well, that's, just a facile comparison. But my point is simply that the Russians went after, as they said, military-related facilities. I think to continue to do that, I imagine they could do that maybe 10, 15 more times and not exhaust the targets that they hit. So what I'm saying here is that as long as they know where all these underground things are, and as long as they have enough Reshniks and other things to fire that way, I don't think that they really expect that after a while the Ukrainians will have enough firing positions left to fire these drones from, if the drones are allowed to come in from outside, like from Britain or from Germany or from France or from wherever. What do you think of that? You know more about this than I do.
You know, Production rates are very hard. The Oreshnik is a derivative of the YARS, which is a missile that's being produced. There's some belief that the first stage of the or the second stage of the YARS is the first stage of the Oreshnik. And then there's also the Cedar, which is a new ICBM follow-on to the YARS being developed. And so these are resource intensive programs. There's only a finite of solid rocket motor fuel production facilities. There's only a finite amount of the material that goes into that, the guidance, the launch canisters, the carbon. There's X amount, and now you've added a new missile that's in high demand. But you have strategic acquisition plans, and the Russians, once they have a plan, the plan sort of goes through. And so, the fact is, they probably can produce, up to, 8 to 12 of these a month if they wanted to. If you go back to the SS-20, and this is sort of an analog of the SS-20, at the height of SS-20 production, when the Russians did the Mod 4 and they were getting ready, they were mass producing and they wanted to get the Mod 4 out there with the more accurate warheads. They wanted to get a regiment out at Chukotka so it could challenge the West Coast. They were banging them out. You might have been looking at, closer to 15 a month production. So there is that capacity, and at that time there was the SS-25 being produced as well, and an R&D missile, the Courier, being produced. So Vodkin's machine building plant has the capacity to do this, and I believe the Oreshnik is a high priority missile. So the question is, are they doing 5 or are they doing 12 a month? That seems to be the answer. If it's 5, then I would say that they need to hoard their resources, especially if they're seeking to do damage to Ukraine. If it's 12, I think they have reserve capacity to to maintain a functional reserve that can strike down. There's another bottleneck, which is to stand up a regiment, it isn't just the missiles, but you have to have the launchers, and then the launchers have to be outfitted with specialized equipment. Then they have to be trained, and so it's curious to see what kind of cycling through. The Belarusians make the launcher. It would then go to Volgograd to be upfitted, and then it would be sent to Kapustin Yar, where the regiment would stand up and go through its pacing out in there in practice, and then they would be designated operation. They've gone through their combat tests, and they would go off. It's a very classified number. How many Oreshnik regiments are right now? To be honest, it appears that the Russians haven't fired a serial production Oreshnik yet. Putin said when the Oreshnik was fired the first time that it was an experimental missile going through an operational phase, and he indicated that there were components for about a dozen of these Oreshnik R&D missile test missiles. The debris in this from this appears to be the debris that would be associated with an R&D missile, meaning that you're pulling pieces. You have these bins of computer chipboards and all this, and you're pulling them in to do what you need to do as you're testing things out. Or so, for instance, they found some boards that dated back to 2017 inside the Oreshnik. So I think all three of these missiles are from the R&D stock that they haven't fired a serial production Oreshnik yet. Which
that's a little surprising. No, I was going to not interrupt, but if memory serves, when they fired the first Oreshnik a year and a half ago or so, Putin did say they were going to go into serial production, late last year. So that, as far as you're concerned, they have not serial produced these things
no,
yet.
no, they are. They are serial producing. What I'm saying is that all three of these launches came out of a Kapustin Yar missile test range.
Okay.
None of these launches came out of the operating range of a deployed strategic rocket force unit. All three of
Okay.
these units were launched from the test site at Kapustin Yar. So it tells me that the unit launching it is the test unit, that no operational units have actually been brought in. This may change, in the next strike, because again, all three of these have been sort of demonstration launches. Even though this last one had a real operational assignment, it's still a demonstration launch. But the moment you now incorporate Oreshnik into a formal strike plan, that's beyond the capacity of a missile test launch facility or unit. This is going to be the stuff of deployed units. So that's the other bottleneck, is how many Oreshnik battalions, how many Oreshnik regiments do they have? There's even a question, the Belarusians are supposed to have stood up a regiment, but there's a question as to whether or not, they actually had the actual launchers deployed. You see the imagery, you see every vehicle but the launcher out there being exercised. So there may be a bottleneck there that we're not aware of too. Or the Russians just may be very good at operational security, and when they unleash the Oreshnik, it'll take everybody by surprise. I know that I made I made the pitch of a lifetime last November to be allowed to tour an Oreshnik unit and to go and to the production hall of the Oreshnik at Vodkensk. And it was a pitch that was backed up by precedent of the Buravistnik is a nuclear powered cruise missile. I mean, you'd think that was but the Russians have published video of the production hall. The Yars production hall, Avant-Garde production hall, every missile system there, the Russians have allowed local media to come in and film it. And I said, why can't we just do that with the Oreshnik? And they're like, nah, we don't talk about the Oreshnik. And I said, I want to talk to the chief designer. You talk to the chief designer here of everybody. They all publish things. I'd like to talk to the chief designer of the Oreshnik. Get sort of, now we don't talk about these things. So the Russians just don't talk about Oreshnik. They don't.
That was
they
nasty.
don't. Pardon?
That was nasty, Scott. You spent 2 years there, didn't you? For God's sake, you know it in and out. At least you were cooperating with the
But I will.
Soviet.
I will say this about the Russians. They received my pitch. It went to Belousov, which is the thing. They didn't dismiss it outright. It went to Belousov.
Okay. Okay.
And
That is it.
Belousov
Yeah.
sent it back and said no.
Okay.
The pitch
One
then
last
got
question.
rerouted. The pitch got rerouted to the man above Belousov, who
Oh,
sent it to Belousov and said, "Would you be willing to reconsider this?" And Belousov came back and said, "No."
yes.
So they did give me a hearing, a fair hearing, but
That's pretty.
the
That's
point
pretty
that was
damn
made is
good.
that they
Let
aren't
me
going to
ask
talk.
you this. Not Burevistic, Reshnich mobile, right? Mobile missile? Yeah. Whoa, hard to find then, right? Hard to find.
They they
That
they
may that
in
may
theory they operate from known operating bases, but at least normally they'll put at least a regiment is 3 battalions of 3 launchers. So
yeah.
in times of tension, they'll have at least one battalion out in the deployed area. But our satellites will be looking for evidence of deployment, so they have that they do things to try and make sure it's like a nuclear submarine. It's sitting there in its port, and then when it goes out, it sort of goes under, and then it disappears, and everybody's trying to find it. And that's what happens here. These missiles go out, and then they disappear into the wild blue yonder.
Yeah. One related question. Now, from the other side, the launch pads, the launching sites for these drones uh, in in Ukraine itself. Um, Are they hard to target? Are they so many that it doesn't make sense to try to target them all, or could they all be obliterated with a constant stream of attacks over a week or so?
They're mobile as well. They're all mobile. Um,
Okay.
and so basically, the Ukrainians will pick a launch site, and they've published the videos. You'll see the vehicles come up. You'll see them prepare. For instance, the FP5s. They'll prepare them, and there's a launch rail, and they will fire the FP5, and then they'll get out of there. So, what you need is the intelligence on where they're going to launch. You need to know in advance where they're going to launch, or you need to develop again pattern of life assessment. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Stupid people do. I mean, people get lazy over time, and they do it right the one time, and they're not supposed to do it that way again, but they get lazy, so they
Yeah.
they do it again because they feel that they got away with the first time, and now people are seeing them, and the third time they think they can get away with it, they get killed, and the Ukrainians are as guilty of that as anybody.
With 24/7 satellite coverage, is it the case that there are just too damn many of these launching sites and the fact that they're mobile, that it's not possible for the Russians to knock them all out in a reasonable period of time? Because it just seems to me if it is possible for them to do that, that's what they're going to do over the next week or two. And then it won't matter if, well, I guess the launching pads don't amount to much, huh? They can rebuild them, they can put them in a different place. Tell me about this.
Well, again, they're mobile launchers, and so but you would need to have a pre-surveyed site because you're going to bring them in. They need to be pre-surveyed, so that's a dead giveaway when surveys go out there. Um, Communications intelligence, as you know, is some of the most sensitive because once you break into a channel, you don't want to give away that you've broken into the channel. There's a good chance that the Russians are monitoring things that they can't act on because of the sensitivity of it. The other problem with the Russians is they are very slow in terms of the when I was in the Marine Corps, the one thing I got you know recognized for when I was in the artillery was how quickly I would detect a target and have steel on target. My whole purpose, I said, my job is to kill the enemy. So my job is to find out where they are and then kill them immediately. I need to get my intelligence down. I need to get the information flowing to the guns, and the guns need to be firing immediately. So they have to be ready to fire. Um, and that got adapted. We did very well in Desert Storm using this, and today I'm sure they've mastered it even better. The Russians have always been slow in this regard. They use massed artillery, and when long range strike using things, for instance, the Iskander missile today, it started out as an army level missile, So for an army level targeting, the intelligence people take a picture, it goes to the, photo interpreters who look at it, come back with a target. It gets briefed a day later. The missile pours out and it fires against the target, a week and a half later. Well, that's no good in drone warfare. Today, though, the Russians are building enough Iskanders that drone operators on the front line, who are flying in, looking for the appropriate targets. When they find a target, the drone operator has the ability to call in an Iskander strike immediately. And so that shows that the Russians have improved. Now, I'm guessing, because the Russians have learned this, that their campaign will be set up for quick response because intelligence is perishable. You're going to have an intelligence collection plan. I think that their analysts are going to be collecting real-time data, doing real-time assessments, and getting that real-time to the people who are going to be able to immediately respond. So they're going to have, I believe, they'll have Oreshniks on standby. And as soon as they get the target, it'll be now. It takes some time. I mean, when you're dealing with the Oreshniks to spin up you got to spin up the gyros, and then you got to load in the data, and that takes a little bit of time. It's not instantaneously respond. It takes some time to warm it up. But I think that the Oreshnik has such a rapid ability to close with the target once it's launched that I think we're going to be seeing what we call hip shooting. Um, I think you're going to see Oreshniks being hip shot, meaning if the target is high value enough, as soon as it manifests itself, boom, boom, there they go, baby. And now that's a $50 million shot, so your intelligence has to be good. But as you said, if these are mobile targets, and if you're not hitting them quickly, then you're wasting it. If you fire an Oreshnik and it hits an empty field, what good is it? The Oreshnik must hit the target. So, and the Russians are smart enough to know that. But I think that this is why this campaign's not happening um, right now, because you were in the intelligence business. I was in the intelligence business. I've done tactical, combat intelligence of this very nature, looking for mobile Scud missiles during the Gulf War. Um, it takes time to learn the pattern of life of your enemy. It takes time to understand what you're seeing, to comprehend everything, and to be prepared to adjust. Um, it doesn't happen overnight, and so there's things happening right now that I'm confident there are, because if they're not, then Russia's in a lot of trouble. But I know the Russians, and I know they have intelligence people that are better than me, smarter than me, because they're doing it real time. All my stuff is 30 years old. These guys are doing it every day. They're familiar with the technology, and I have the highest confidence that they're going to be able to execute this plan efficiently, unlike what we did against Iran for 37 days.
Yeah, Scott, pardon me for my interrogation here.
No problem.
But clearly, what I'm trying to do is say to myself, well, McGovern, uh, Putin doesn't have to do any more than focus these formidable weapon systems on Ukraine. And there'll be no need for him to go into Latvia or any other place. And if he does a good job in Ukraine, even if new drones and missiles come in, they'll be at a disadvantage because the firing spots will be obliterated. And in other words, I'm trying to convince myself that he could win this thing by just focusing on Ukraine and not going off like Karaganov and the others are saying, no, you got to get those damn Europeans. Uh, that's that's my. You have to forgive me for trying to persuade
No, it's
myself
and
that that's the case.
it's not just because the expensive weapons, Iskander, Oreshnik, and others, they're expensive, but there's two units out there. There's actually more. The Russians are very innovative, but there's two that are publicly discussed. One is Rubicon. Rubicon is a specialist drone unit that the Russians put together to defeat Ukrainian drone units, because there was a while there where the Ukrainians were flooding the zone with drones and causing a whole bunch of problems for the Russians. And so Rubicon was the answer. It's a specialist unit. They put together task forces that go into a zone, and the Ukrainians hate when that happens because all the Ukrainian drone operators end up dying. because Rubicon's very, very good at what they do. And so Rubicon is now also, they have to adjust because the Ukrainians adjust, Rubicon has to adjust. There are things happening now with AI, and not the bad AI, but the kind of AI that allows for autonomous target collection and identification within the system, and then to communicate so that you can create a drone swarm that will dominate an area. And Rubicon is now beginning to master this. There's another group called WAR-Sarmat. Dmitry Rogozhin used to be the head of Roscosmos. In 2022, he was relieved of that. And then he went on and he created something called, or he took over something called Tsar's Wolves, which got involved in drone research and development. And now he's turned it into a major center called WAR-Sarmat. And they do a whole bunch of things, but one of the things they're doing is advanced AI-driven drone swarm tactics. And if you want to talk about defeating what the Ukrainians are doing right now, you see they have to come out and launch. And, again, what the Russians are going to be doing, I believe, is allowing certain launches to take place, because what you want is a pattern of life. You want to see how they come out, how much time it takes, what are the different targets you're looking at. Collect, collect, collect. You have to do it multiple times so to see if it repeats. Patterns have to repeat to be of value. And then once you gather this, you're going to see these drone swarms come out the next time and kill everything. It won't be just a one lucky shot, a two lucky shot. It'll be an AI coordinated drone swarm taking over a sector, and then on their own finding the targets and killing them, hunting them down. Boom, boom, boom. And if you do that enough times, nobody's going to want to launch drones in Ukraine. So even though Ukraine has sort of advantage right now, this is just my assessment, because the Russians are very, as they would be, circumspect. I mean, this is a war. And so all my stuff comes from open source. I just happen to be pretty good at looking at open source and reading into it, I guess, because there's only so many ways, this, right? There's only so many ways to skin a cat. I mean, you could talk about a highly classified way to skinning a cat, but you still got to cut the fur and you got to take the skin off the cat. And there's only so many ways you can do that. And that, with SIGINT, there's only so many ways you can capture a signal. With imagery, there's only so many ways you can do that. The innovation here is the AI, and how they use that AI to click. But even then, it's not rocket science, literally. What is it? Intelligence is an art. You know this. You know how we do things. It hasn't changed. The technology changed, but the problem's the same. What are we looking at? You got to see it to look at it. What's collecting the image. You still need a trained set of eyeballs to look at. You can tell a computer to look at, but somebody has to tell the computer what to look at. But you're still identifying a target and then bringing to bear whatever solution to that target it is. And so, I look at everything that the Russians publish. Maybe they're going to not let me into Russia this time, but I think I'm pretty good at understanding what the Russians are getting ready to do to the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians are getting ready to do it to the Russians too. We're looking at a race right now who can master AI-driven drone swarm technology. The Ukrainians are working out, the British are trying to help them, but the Russians, they have a level. They do things differently. See, the Ukrainians do things differently too, but then they have to interface with Western industry. And Western industry is a top-down thing where, you have to convince the top that something's good. The Ukrainians are like the Russians. It's the boys on the front line, the girls on the front line who say, this is what we want. And they say, do it, do it. In Russia, the innovation of these units of Rubicon and of WAR-Sarmat comes from the guys on the front line. And they're there saying, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. And the top's job isn't to say, well, send it upstairs and we're going to look at it for a month. The top's job is to say, tell me what you need. We're going to get it to you so you can do it, and then report back. And it's literally a laboratory in the field. Anyways, I've been battling on long enough on that.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So what? There was an attempt on Putin's life by the CIA and Ukraine some year ago. I'm sure that Russia's had ample opportunities to kill Zelensky over these 4 years. Would the decapitation be part of this new attack on Kiev, or is it not worth it for the Russians to try to kill him?
I'll
Not
go
if
real.
he's in,
Go ahead, Ray. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray. I'm going to
I was
ask you
gonna
also.
say, not if he's in Sweden. I, I know where he is. I mean, I think it's quite likely that he's doing one of these little roundabout trips. In some ways, Zelensky is kind of almost useful for Russia. I don't know if they want to take him out or not. They know how he got in there. Scott's the only one that spelled that out in chapter and verse. What oligarch he's greased what skins to get Zelensky in there. Um, but he's in there now, and he's surrounded by corrupt people. Many people think, gosh, that he's corrupt too. And so there's lots going on there. I don't know how long he's going to last in Kiev. Certainly, if the Russian offensive proceeds as I think it will this spring and summer, he's going to be in really dire straits. Maybe then he'll go off, flying off somewhere to stay. Maybe this time he's going off somewhere to stay. Who knows? Who can rule that out? Stockholm, I wouldn't pick. I'd pick something much farther away. Anyhow, that's my take on Zelensky. Well, what do you think, Scott?
There's this group in Russia called the National Unity Club, and they are affiliated with called the Union State. The Union State is a political economic relationship between Russia and Belarus. Um, the Union State speaks of the three sisters, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine.
Right.
That the Union State needs to have this troika. Um, and you remember, this is Lukashenko and Putin we're talking about. This isn't some hobby club. Lukashenko and Putin are the heads of state who come together for the Union State. This is a serious thing. They have been planning together with a variety of other outlets on what the post-conflict Ukraine will look like. Uh, they have people like Azarov, the former prime minister, working for them. They have other former Ukrainian politicians working for them. And they are identifying, if you, there's a cool book called Armageddon. Leon Uris wrote it. It was about the Berlin airlift. Brilliant
Mhm.
book. I love that book. But one of the interesting things about the book, and the reason why I bring up fiction is because sometimes fiction, when done well, tells the story better than nonfiction. We know that the United States prepared military government during World War II, that as we moved into Germany, teams of of military government would come in and they were assigned to different urban areas to take over. They had black lists, white lists, gray lists of the Nazis to denazify, and they had an economic plan and the whole works. Um, the Russians are doing this today as we speak. The Russians are preparing for post-conflict Ukraine and governance. The problem is they don't know what ground truth is going to be. Because if you're in a negotiation, that implies some flexibility. And, you know, here's the other issue. Do you really want to replace Zelensky with Zelensky? I mean, Zelensky is a known quantity. All your post-government theorizing is based upon the incompetence and corruption of Zelensky. You know what he creates, therefore you can build a model to exploit that so that when the time comes to remove Zelensky and replace it, it's as smooth as you can make it. But if you while you're preparing for a Zelensky model, suddenly Zelensky is the president or Budanov is the president. It complicates it. Now you have to step back and go, okay, now how does this factor change? What does it do to the demographics, et cetera? So my belief, again, these are conversations that are very sensitive, therefore they don't happen. I can try and have these conversations, and I will be politely told that this is a topic that maybe we don't want to talk about because it's real world. And they're not going to talk about real world stuff with some idiot former Marine intelligence officer. But I ask questions, and I can tell by the way people respond, if the question's close to target or not. I believe that the Russians, prior to this most recent murder of the 21 teachers, that the Russians were playing a game that had the conflict ending, and then there would be elections, and that the Russians were going to do something with the elections to try and get a foothold into Ukraine, and they're going to play the long game in terms of, working through electoral processes, economic pressures to get the right people in charge. I think that no longer applies. I think Russia has made the decision that this war ends with unconditional surrender, that they don't need to worry about the niceties of dealing with a Ukrainian government. There will be no Ukrainian government. When this war ends, the Ukrainian government will go the way of the Nazi government. They will be eliminated, removed, and the Russians will get to dictate exactly what replaces them. And if this is the model I think is happening right now, then Zelensky must stay in power, because Zelensky provides the most comprehensive, repeatable events. You know what's going to happen. You can control what's going to happen. And the longer Zelensky stays in, the more reviled he is within Ukraine, meaning they are going to be open to a new government. And as long as you put in a competent government that answers the needs of the people, that government will succeed in a post-conflict environment. So I think the Russians aren't going to kill Zelensky. I don't think they want to kill Zelensky. I think they want Zelensky to keep doing what he's doing. Because if you kill Zelensky, you turn him into a martyr. Overnight, Zelensky becomes a martyr. And all the corruption, everything that gets swept away. Now you have the new mythology of Zelensky, the brave Churchillian man who stood up to Russia. And he was so wonderful that the Russians had to kill him. They had to target him because Zelensky was great. And then the person that replaces Zelensky builds on that mythology. I am the heir to Zelensky. I will follow through with Zelensky's vision of doing this. And it makes things very hard. So I believe that the Russians are going to keep Zelensky alive, that they're going to do everything they can to make sure that he's not replaced. And that in the end, Zelensky will be the man who signs, or at least is there at the moment of surrender. And then they will remove him and bring in their government, and they'll go for the smoothest possible transition. That's just me talking. That's just my speculation, informed speculation, but speculation nonetheless.
Makes a lot of sense.
So, Ray, Putin, in one of his questions at the press conference yesterday, he said this: as far as the statements by European politicians about their preparations for a war against Russia are concerned, that is nonsense. They are allegedly doing this in connection with Russia's aggressive plans with respect to Western European countries. It is a lie. It is a gross, blatant lie. And as Goebbels once said, the more unbelievable the lie, the quicker people will be to believe it. These are the very standards guiding Western politicians and mass media in their day-to-day operations. And then he said everything they do is designed to keep the confrontation with Russia going and justify the huge spending from the budgets of their countries getting into the pocket of the European taxpayer. Do you agree that that is really what's behind all this aggressive talk by Europeans against Russia, this preparing for war in 2029? We're going to hit Kaliningrad. All of this stuff that Russia's about to attack, this is all about just getting into the European taxpayer's pocket?
Well, Joe, unless one says that these European leaders, and we're talking mostly about Merz and Starmer and Macron, unless they're crazy, unless they can't understand the real world, that's the most likely explanation, except also for the fact that they've put all their political capital in the struggle in Ukraine. They're going to be removed from power, I think, within the next year. All of them. Starmer may be the first. Merz is the most hated chancellor in Germany since chancellors started being in Germany. And who's the other guy? Macron, he's going to be gone next year for sure. So again, I think, like Scott, the Russians do play a longer game. They have a longer horizon, and they're thinking, well, these guys will not be able to raise the money necessary to do the things that they say they're going to do. That by and by, if they do try that, the social democratic principle, which have made Western Europe so livable, are going to be really disappointed, will be an uprising. And so it's not possible for the Europeans to do the things that they pretend they intend to do. And that's just one thing. The other thing is the Russian threat. Now, do they really believe that the Russians are threatening Western Europe? I don't think so. It's more this building arms and stuff, this lucrative business, riches, and pretending their reputations. So once it becomes clear to more and more people in Germany and in France and in the UK and elsewhere, that this is really not necessary, that not only don't we have the money, but we can't divert money from social programs. Then somebody can say, well, how big a threat is Russia anyway? And you may not know this, but in that interview just yesterday, the Q&A in Astana, in Kazakhstan, uh, in the midst of what you just quoted, Putin kind of loses it. Uh, he talks about how this all started with James Baker and the promise not to widen NATO, and boom, 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 all these betrayals. He goes down to the Ukraine coup, and then most of all the Minsk, because that's what he feels so strongly. He's admitted publicly, I was had on Minsk. Okay. I thought these guys would come through. And now Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande admit that it was just a trick. It was a trick, openly admitted and gloated over to give them 8 years to build up the Ukrainian army to NATO standards, to equip them and get them ready to do in Luhansk and Donetsk. So he mentions that twice in this interview. So what I'm saying here is that Putin is not going to be fooled a fourth time. And yeah, they're going to win in Ukraine. But for some strange, it sounds strange. It's not strange at all. They want the U.S. to be in there with them. Yes. Am I saying that they want the U.S. in Europe? Yes, they do. Because compared to these crazies, the U.S. is looking at Ukraine the same way the Russians are, and there can't be a firm peace, no matter how you construct it, without a new architecture, which is signed on by everybody, so it won't happen again. Okay? So it's a strange set of circumstances, but Putin is not threatening Europe. And I just go back to the fact that this will be a big revelation to Americans. Uh, my recollection is that Joe Biden, in his last inaugural speech, looked around at that packed Congress and said, anybody in this room, anybody in this room think that Putin is going to stop at Ukraine? No, you go out to Poland and you go on to the Baltic states. Come on, everybody thinking, oh yeah, that's what they're doing. No. So he stopped in Ukraine, for God's sake. And that's what Putin keeps saying. Is he telling the truth? Yeah, he's telling the truth. Are the others lying? Yes, they're lying. Now, lies have a way of dying a natural death. I'm just hoping that enough Americans will come around to realize how they've been deceived on this whole thing, that the war was not necessary. As you said in your preliminary notes, Joe, the Russians were mousetrapped into this. And we have no less than the Secretary General of NATO speaking to the European Parliament about 2.5 years ago and saying, NATO, the Russians didn't want Ukraine in NATO. They gave us a treaty. It said, no, Ukraine in NATO. And they said, sign this. And we said, no. They said, sign this or else we will invade Ukraine. And we said, no. And so they invaded Ukraine. But we got Finland and we got Sweden, so they got two new members instead. I mean, the guy, this shows the degree, this shows the quality of leadership you have in NATO and in Western Europe. I mean, by that time, 500,000 Ukrainian kids were killed, okay? Not to be maybe 200,000 Russian kids. So, I mean, this is the logic. And if people don't know that the Secretary General of NATO admitted that this was all about challenging Russia by getting Ukraine into NATO. Well, that's just because the word hasn't come out yet. That's what we're trying to do, of course. And, I hate to say it, but, well, I don't hate to say it. It's fact that that long paragraph in the middle of that Q&A that Putin could not avoid saying goes boom, boom, boom down, finishes with Minsk, okay? And later he comes back to Minsk at the very end. He says, Minsk is not going to happen again. They admitted what it was all about. We're not going to suffer that anymore. And the only way they can make this stick would be with U.S. help and NATO sort of disintegrated. And in my view, that's coming in another year or so. I don't think that the NATO is very long for this world.
Scott, do you agree with Putin that Europe's fear mongering and warmongering are economic at its base?
Well, let's put it this way. Their militaries are broken, and the price tag associated with fixing the militaries are prohibitively high, meaning that left to your own volition in peacetime, look, the German parliament woke up to an uncomfortable fact. In 2022, Boris Pistorius, the defense minister under Scholz, said, I need 100 billion euro to rebuild, get the German military up to where it needs to be to deal with the Russians. Because the Russians are in Ukraine, we need to strike now. We need to rebuild our military. And the parliament gave it to them, 100 billion euro. Just this year, the report card came in. It turned out to be 111 billion euro, and they don't know where it went. They don't know how it was spent. Nothing happened. It went into a bottomless pit because the German military is so fundamentally broken that it can't be fixed with all that money pouring in. It's the British right now are so broken that even though they're talking this big show, they've acknowledged we're not going to be able to buy any weapons until 2030. And even then, we might not be able to buy any weapons because we're just broke. Nothing, we can't produce anything. We don't have the money to produce anything. We don't have any capacity to do this. So what you need to do, therefore, is you have to change the political paradigm. So you have to create the inevitability of conflict. And that's what the Germans are trying to do. This most recent strategy paper says we will be at war in 2029. We will be at war. It's going to happen. 100%. We're going to war. We must prepare. There is no tomorrow. We must pay. But the point is, there's not going to be a war in 2029. The British are saying, well, it's 2030. I mean, they need to get together and make sure they have, the messaging has to be at least consistent. But the British are saying 2030, and they're hard, and others are buying into it. Yes, we agree. Rutte, we must make sure that we are prepared to fight the war that our grandparents fought. Well, Rutte, most of your grandparents, like the Germans and everybody and the collaborators, they fought against the Russians who kicked your ass. You really want to fight that war? Because I'm pretty sure the Russians would be more than happy to kick your ass again. I mean, this is the stupidity of it. Why are they doing this? Because it makes no sense. None of the arguments they make pass the basic intellectual litmus test. Money. They are desperate. We're talking about failed economies right now, literally failed economies, failing economies. For the Germans to go, I think they're at 183,000 troops today in the vaunted Bundeswehr. And they want to get to 460,000, somewhere around there. Great. And 200,000 of those are going to be reservists, but a new kind of reservist, an active reservist who's out there training and everything. They can't recruit anybody. And so now they're sitting there saying, well, we want this to be an all volunteer force, but we may have to go back to conscription. That ain't going to fly. That's going to be a political disaster for them. But even if they could get the manpower, which they can't, we're talking about building. I mean, they have trouble equipping the forces they have today. They put this brigade, the Lithuanian brigade, in Lithuania. There's a multi-force battalion. Then they brought in 2 German battalions, brand new battalions, an armored battalion and an armored infantry battalion. And they don't have any equipment for them, so they have to build the equipment, but they don't know if they can build the equipment. because their industry sucks. So they don't even know if they can get these 2 battalions up and running, and they want to now basically quadruple the size of their military and equip it with what? With what? Artillery. They can't even meet the ammunition requirements to support the war going on in Ukraine. You want them now to suddenly build artillery ammunition stockpiles capable of sustaining a 400,000 man army in combat operations against the Russians? This is all about money. This is just they're fear mongering to create the political foundation that justifies the acquisition of funds. But again, what will happen, because it's non-sustainable, this is, what was it? There's a movie, I forget who, but it was The Money Pit. It basically is, 2 comedians bought a house and they were going to fix it up, and they just put all their money in, and they could never fix it up because the house was just fundamentally broke. NATO is fundamentally broken. There's no amount of money that can fix NATO. That's just a straight up guarantee. There's no amount of money that can fix NATO. I'll make the following assessment. There's no amount of money that can fix the American military. We have collectively bought into this technology intensive system where the Mickey Mat, to borrow Ray's term, it just exists to make money. We build technologically superior things that are supposed to intimidate our enemies, but it doesn't work. But it doesn't matter because money, money, money. It costs money, and the money goes down to the factories, and the factories have jobs, and the jobs have voters, and the voters have jobs, and they vote for the people who keep them in, and then they all speculate on the economy with insider trade, and they make millions, and it's all about the money, money, money. And our military is broke. And we're not going to be able to fix it, because to fix this broken system, you have to be willing to start from the bottom and fix it up. We can just use the Patriot system as an example. The Patriot was broke when it was initially designed. It was never going to work. And then we bring it into the Gulf War where it didn't work, but we lied about it working to create the impression that it did work. So we sold it to more people, and it has never worked. And it never will work. And yet we're going to double down on stupid and make more Patriots. And we can say that about THAAD. We can say that about SM-3, SM-6. We can say about all of our weapon systems. None of them work as designed. They all cost too much money, and we don't have enough money to replace them once we use them. This is the United States. This is NATO. You know what military does work? The Russian military. We can make fun of it all we want to, but they produce stuff. That stuff goes to the troops, and the troops use it in combat, and they prevail. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be, but that's not the way it works right now. NATO is broke. Europe will never fix its military, not so long as they continue to allow this whole system to be hijacked by the defense industrialists. These are the true enemies of society. The military industrial complex are the worst people in the world because they lie to us. They've hijacked Congress, and they just make this endless thing. If we took the money that we pour into building militaries that don't work, we could solve all of society's problems. Imagine taking trillions of dollars and pouring into infrastructure or education or healthcare. Do you imagine what a shining city on the hill America really would be if we didn't waste all this money on empowering Congress and empowering the elite defense industrialists to go to a war that we can't win? I mean, that's the thing. We can't win. These people have made us so weak that we can't beat Iran. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. I have nothing but respect for the Iranians, but I'm sorry, Iran. There's just no way you should be able to stand toe-to-toe with the United States. There's just no way. When you look at the capacities of both nations, we outclass them in everything except apparently brain power, because they actually prepared for a war that they were ready to fight over the long term. We didn't prepare for anything. We bought into Israeli hocus pocus that if we kill one man, the system collapsed. We don't have to worry about anything else. Then we got engaged in a war. We killed the one man. The system didn't collapse, and we can't win. The Iranians are ready to win. Anyways, I agree with Ray. NATO's not long for this world.
Well, Mickey
the
Matt,
last 6 months or a year, I don't know, but it's not going to be around much longer.
Mickey Matt belongs in Disneyland. Then is what you're saying, yeah.
Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, let me on Mickey Mat, just for our audience. It's the only acronym I have ever gotten into a dictionary, but it's the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academia Think Tank Complex. Mickey Matt. Now, why do I say media as if in all caps? Because that's the linchpin. That's what makes it work. That's why American citizens don't really appreciate that they're being had. Eisenhower, when he talked about the military-industrial complex, he said one other thing, and that was very important. He said, look, the only antidote, the only way you can fix this is by a well-informed citizenry. We ain't got that. And that's why I really enjoy being on with you, Joe, and you, Scott. And maybe we can break through. Maybe we can tell the American people, you've really been had, okay? Just like we've had other people in thinking that they could rely on our umbrella, like the Gulfies and all those other people. Um, so uh, it's the problem, and I can't transition to this, but I do want to tell you how Putin ended up this very long Q&A just yesterday, because he came back once again to Minsk. What did he say? I have to get a real desk here so I can figure out how to keep things. Well, he just said, look, Minsk is the thing that we really regret. We're not going to fall for Minsk anymore. They openly say that they took us to the cleaners by having this 7 to 8 year uh, hiatus where we thought we trusted them. We ain't going to trust them anymore. Trust is the coin of the realm, and there can't be really any negotiations. Let me just finish this part by saying negotiators. Oh, yeah, the Russians say they're open to negotiations with the Europeans. So send somebody already. Kayakala says, oh, this is a trick. My God, what a dirty trick trying to get us to talk to them. Okay. And so they're asked, Putin's asked yesterday, how about who do you have they named somebody? No, I can't really comment on who they named because that's up to them, but it's really crazy because they can't seem to get their act together to even talk to us. And without that happening, and we're always open to talks, nothing's going to happen at all. So, are you listening to me? He says. He finishes up on Minsk and he just says, this is going to happen again. And as I said before, on May 9th, after the parade, he made a big point of saying, as for Ukraine, that's kind of dormant because the Americans are busy in Iran. But by and by, it's going to happen. The US and we look at the problem in Ukraine in the same way. Big deal, big change over the last 3 or 4 years. There will be cooperation, I hope, once the Russians end the thing with their offensive this summer, and as Scott suggests, more sensible things happen in Kiev, whether or not the Russian hand is behind it or not.
So essentially, Scott, you're saying that the Europeans think Russia's bluffing, and Europe is the ones actually bluffing about their tough talk against Russia.
Well, the problem with I mean, they're either bluffing or they're insane. I mean, it's one or the other. Because if you're not bluffing, that means you can back it up. But the thing about somebody who can back up normally you don't see. Um, I got to be polite here.
No, you don't. Go ahead.
When somebody who has their act together walks into a room, first of all, a person with their act together. Let's look at Vladimir Putin. I think Ray has been hitting this on the head. He's calm as the day is long normally. Calm. Why? Because he's confident in what he knows. He's confident in what he can do. He's confident in his control of the situation. So you don't hear sheer shrill language from him. You don't see impulsive behavior. Now let's look at every single European leader without exception. the shrillest language possible, the most impulsive language. Why? Because they're compensating for the fact that they don't have their act together, that there is no substance behind them. They are making noise to disguise the fact that they are truly incompetent. And they're also impotent. The strongest man doesn't have to tell you he has a good right jab and a strong left hook, because it's just assumed that it's there because he looks like he has it. But if I have to come in and go, I got a good jab and a good left hook, and I'm going to knock you out, people will be looking and going, no, you don't. I'll take that fight. Again, Game of Thrones. When the hand of the king turns to to Joffrey, he says, "I am the king. I am the king." And he says, "Any man who has to say he is the king is not the king." Putin doesn't run around and say, "I'm the king." It's just assume he is. Every single one of these wannabes in Europe scream it loud to how kingly they are, queenly they are, and how important they are. They're not, because if they have to announce their importance, that means that they're not important enough to us to just acknowledge it by the sheer weight of their presence.
So, Ray, you mentioned that Putin said, or you're saying that Europe deceived Russia 4 times. In those 4 times, are you including the one that Putin this month also revealed about Macron calling him and telling him, if you want this deal, an Istanbul deal, to work, you got to withdraw those troops you sent to Kiev, and then it'll work. So Putin said yes, he withdrew them, and then Johnson, who's in cahoots with Macron, shows up in Kiev and tells Zelensky, don't sign the deal, which has led to the war to go on for 3 or 4 more years. Were you including that in the 4 that you talked about? And was that a revelation to you? It was to me.
Yeah, it's hard to keep count. It was a revelation to everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, Putin even said, we have a tape of this. So I'm saying this for the first time, but Macron deceived me. He said, look, the Ukrainians can't give in with a gun at their head. So could you retreat, withdraw those tanks? Remember those tanks that were lined up in a line of 2 miles? So talk about vulnerable, kind of withdraw them, and then you sign on the dotted line. We'll be okay. And then, as you say, Johnson came in later. So. Uh, as I say, Putin can't resist rehearsing all this stuff. And I found that little paper as he finishes up this interview, apropos of not much else. He says, look, there was a time called Minsk. Now, for people who don't remember, that was a degree of autonomy promised to the Donbass, okay, in return for a ceasefire. Uh, Everything pretty much be the same. The Russians were not claiming Donbass, much less Kherson or the other one. What is it?
Zaporozhye.
Zaporozhye, yeah. So he says, look, and now we find out that they were signed in Minsk, and there are pictures of him with Merkel and Hollande, signed to win some time and arm Ukraine instead of resolving all the existing issues peacefully. What we have always sought, and for what we are ready even now. That's definitely enough now. I hope I haven't offended anybody. Don't be angry. I gotta go. So this keeps sticking in his craw. Not only were they trying to find a peaceful solution, but they tried from the second day. On the 25th of February 2022, Putin named his negotiator, and so did Zelensky. Zelensky named his best friend. His name was David Arachamia, okay? And they went to Belarus, and then they went to Istanbul. They did the damn thing. They got it all together by referendum to Putin personally and Zelensky. And then to have the double cross by Macron and by Boris Johnson acting for the UK and the US. And, for Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to admit it several months later, well, this is about weakening Russia, giving Russia a strategic defeat. Well, the wonder of it is that Putin has been able to restrain, build up his forces in a very cogent and measured way, and now he's in a position to win. Let me just add one more thing. Now, Scott, you mentioned you're going to St. Petersburg and the International Economic Forum. That rang a bell. And I was thinking 10 years ago, I went back in my notes, 10 years ago, there were at this forum, June it was 10 years ago, Putin gathered a small group of Western leaders, Western, not leaders, but Western journalists. Really amazing. I got him in a small room, maybe there are 15 of them, with some of his aides there. And he says to them, look, I'm going to talk to you man to man. I don't think you're going to I don't think you'll be listening to me and even reporting this to your newspaper or your journalist editors. But I just want to tell you, look, we're at a crossroads here. The Americans won't talk to us. Now, this is 2016, okay? They won't talk to us. The Americans are building these ABM systems. They say they're against Iran. For God's sake, we know what they're in. We know that in Poland and in Romania there are missile sites that could house missiles to strike us in 5 minutes at worst case. So look, let's not be silly about this. Let's realize that I want to tell you that we're not going to match their plans, very expensive plans for a plan that does not work. I speak of an ABM plan. We're going to do, well, I'm not going to tell you exactly what we're going to do, but we're going to find ways around that and through that, much less expensive ways. We're going to have to do that because we're forced to. They got out of the ABM treaty, they got out of the INF treaty. What are we going to do? They won't even talk to us, okay? Now, that was a harbinger of what was to come. Uh, Part of the teaching point here is the fact that Putin was right at the outset. No newspaper person or reported that to their editors, or their editors just. I have it because it was taped by a Russian person, and we have it. So we have the tape. So what was the bottom line here? The bottom line was, look, we're going to do this other kind of thing. We're really clever people, believe it or not, and we're gonna meet this threat with even more clever ways. 2 years later, at the State of the Union, I mean, State of the Nation, they call it, address, 2018 now, uh, Putin does a show and tell, for God's sake. Yeah, he's got video. He's okay. Now look, there. I'll show you 6 videos here. This is what we're developing. This one goes around the South Pole. This one has a nuclear generator on it, powered, and this one, blah blah blah. And he shows us, and he says, "Now look, do you believe us now? Will you listen to us now?" I tried to tell you 2 years ago with your journalists, but they probably didn't even tell you. So the bottom line here, what I'm trying to say is that the Mickey Mat, as Scott has already said, is from hunger. It's feckless. It's just about making money. The Russians spend a lot less money on more sophisticated things. They have engineers and scientists that won't quit. And the thing that surprised me the most is this nuclear powered, what is it? I guess it's a cruise missile. Scott, you would know more. The WAR-Ritter, which can go forever and go around wherever the south. Maybe you could say a word about the WAR-Ritter, since we've been talking about the Oreshnik. Can you, for a second, Scott, talk about that?
Sure. I mean, the Burevestnik is a system that's been in development for some time. Again, Vladimir Putin has alluded to it in 2018 in his address. In 2020, I guess 2021 maybe, there was an accident in northern Russia involving the Burevestnik, and a lot of speculation about the Russians didn't have the ability to do this. It was fascinating though, because you know they published the obituary of the nuclear scientists who died in this tragic accident. And if you take the time to actually dig, you have to dig a little bit. It's not easy to get, but if you dig, you can find reference to them. You will find not only their obituaries, but then you can find their research papers. You can find who their bosses are. You can find what office they work at. You can find what work they've been doing. And again, this is just, it's open source, not as comprehensive as you'd want it to be if we were doing this in the real world. I'd want other sources and I'd want to double check. But the Russians have been working on parallel programs. And one of the things the Russians work on are small nuclear reactors that can be used in the Arctic, and small nuclear reactors that can be used on the moon, and small nuclear reactors that can be used in space. And what's interesting is that the United States always said that these nuclear powered cruise missiles were impractical because when we tried to build them, we just spewed nuclear radiation everywhere and it could be detected. And yet the Russians have developed extraordinarily clean uh, small nuclear reactors. And the Burevestnik is a derivative of this technological approach. Um, it's very clean, very clean, and it's very efficient. And it does exactly what it's supposed to do, which is, um, I have to be honest, when I first heard about the accident, I I'm not an expert in nuclear propulsion. And I was still early on in my digging stage. So my initial reaction was that when they said nuclear powered, that was somehow a language problem. That what they meant is that the Burevestnik was a cruise missile that could be stored underground or underwater in a ready state. But when you have to spin something up, you need heat. But where do you get your heat from? You get your heat from a nuclear power source. And because when they had this accident, the Burevestnik, there was a hypergolic fuel detected in the water. That's normally a starter fuel or can be a sustainment fuel, but hydrazine type fuel. Um, and so that made me think that this was a liquid power engine, et cetera. No, it's not. It's a nuclear powered cruise missile. It really does what it says it does. I believe the hypergolic that was found is the starter fuel that's used to initiate whatever event that's done that because the nuclear reactor is a sustainer. But yeah, I don't know. It's classified technology. I don't have access to it. But I think that the Russians have done it. I think it's a real missile. We know it works. We know it flies. It flies forever, and it's clean. Um, so again, for all the people out there who are saying that the Russians, had to butcher up all the washing machines in Ukraine to get the chips to get their missiles flying. Um, no, the Russians are some of the most sophisticated players in the world when it comes to advanced technologies, and they have done things that we can't even imagine. They do things in solid rocket motor fuel. It's just crazy. Um, I don't want to bore you, but I'm just saying at some point in time, ask yourself how when we fire a Minuteman engine, it lights and then it accelerates at a given you know sustainable rate of acceleration based upon the grain of the motor and the consistency of the fuel. Well, the Russians have somewhere it can hypershoot up a different grain, and then it can change the configuration of the grain to slow it down, and then allow for during that period of slow down to be remaneuvered, and then hyper again, all in the same solid casting. They are doing things that we we can't even comprehend, and it's deployed. It's real. It's there. Um, the Russians are very good at what they do. They're very good at what they do.
Ray, you
But
mentioned,
Scott, no,
yeah,
but Scott, I thought Russia was just a glorified guest station with some pretense to
flag.
be strategic. Uh, that's the other side of it. The Russians look at us as not comprehending how sophisticated and how well armed they are, and that's dangerous. I'll say no more. Joe, you wanted to
Yeah.
intervene here.
No, I was just going to say that's the joke. They ridicule Russia's preparedness and the washing machine thing, and at the same time they say they're going to be in Paris by December. We have to be worried. So, which one is it? Are they incompetent and badly equipped, or are they a threat to Europe? So that just shows the lie. So I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that Zelensky sent his friend to negotiate in Belarus in the few days after. Was that the guy who was then murdered while the negotiations were going on by the SBU? Is that the same guy?
No, that was a
Oh,
different fellow. This is out of Khamia.
I
He
see.
stayed on there, and just 2 years ago, he came back to Kiev and he spilled the beans on the whole thing. He explained how Johnson came and what date he came, and
Right.
so it's not like a big secret. The Ukrainians in Ukrainskaya Pravda printed it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So he's the one who explained about Johnson. No, but this guy Kiriev, who was killed, he apparently, I'm just reading, he warned, he went into Russia and came back a day before the invasion and warned the Ukrainians that Russia was going to invade the next day. This is according to Wikipedia, and that the Ukrainians damaged the airport where Russia was going to land. And then a week later, he was assassinated by the SBU. They said he was a double agent, which may have been. But let's move on. We talked about deception, the deception of Russia. Well, we now have seen how the United States has twice deceived Iran during negotiations by attacking them. So I want to pivot to Iran now in the time we have left here, uh, to the three-ring circus of Donald Trump. That's what he seems to be running on Iran because you cannot make heads or tails out of this. The latest word is he's deciding whether he's going to accept a 60-day extension of the ceasefire. He had a meeting with his national security advisors for 2 hours on Friday, and he's still trying, as of right now, deciding whether to accept this deal, which would, for 60 days, extend a ceasefire. And right away, he says the Strait of Hormuz would be opened. He would lift the blockade, and they would negotiate lifting of sanctions, unfreezing of Iranian assets, and the nuclear issues would take place during the 60 days. The Iranians have a slightly different story. They expect the sanctions to be lifted, at least some of them right away, and some of the assets to be unfrozen. So they're not, and in the meantime, they're firing this week at one another. I mean, could anybody make sense of this? Because I can't. Scott?
Well, let's just start with the fact that the United States is agreement incapable. Um, that's just the bottom line. There's not going to be an agreement because Donald Trump can't agree to anything. The Ukrainians aren't going to budge on very essential things. Control the Strait of Hormuz, generating income through the Strait of Hormuz, reparations, lifting of sanctions, return of seized assets. You know, these are fundamental things that the Ukrainians just aren't going to yield on. They've made it clear they're not going to yield on it, and yet individually in totality, Trump can't execute these because it'll be clear that he lost the war. That's the problem. Trump lost the war. Trump literally has no cards. He can threaten to restart the war, but Iran's ready for that. I mean, if you want to restart the war, that's a game that they're ready to play, and they're going to win that game. And the Arab nations, the Gulf Arab states, know Iran's going to win that game, so they're telling Trump they don't want to play this game. And Trump's not going to play this game because he's also looking at the fact that, while he may not be able to save the House, he might be able to prevent the Senate from collapsing to the extent that there's 60 votes to convict. Donald Trump's going to be impeached sometime in January or February of next year because the Democrats are going to take the House because of the incompetence of this man, and Hakeem Jeffries is going to go on the warpath, and so there will be impeachment. The question is, will there be conviction? And Trump understands that on November, the only thing that people are going to care about is the economy. It's the economy, stupid. And Trump, therefore has to get the economy back and running. 3 to 6 weeks, no matter what we do, there's going to be a complete collapse of the global energy market because we've been pouring in the strategic reserves to create the artificial impression that there is oil available, but we've run it out and the Strait of Hormuz isn't open. So there's no replacement oil coming out. And, you know, we're going to have a big, big problem. And if that problem is allowed to sustain itself, we're looking at total economic collapse in many parts of the world this summer, and that will have a cascading impact. And the American people will face that, and Trump will be able to reverse it. And on November, it will be the economy stupid, and they'll vote for anybody but Donald Trump's people. And that could lead to not only impeachment but conviction. And that's the end of Donald Trump. Because he's the most easily convictable president that's ever served. So Trump needs to bring this fight to an end. He just has to do it in his own way. So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to get an ugly non-deal because he can't make a deal. We're going to get a situation where the Iranians are going to let stuff go through the strait. They're going to collect money. Trump's going to say he's against the collecting of money. He'll lift the blockade. He'll release some funds, but not all the funds because he needs to be satisfied in the nuclear, which isn't going to happen. And so you're just going to have this situation where you can't agree to a deal, but you avoid the outright war. There may be some skirmishing here and there, but ultimately oil has to get flowing. Donald Trump will find a way to get the oil flowing that doesn't require him to admit that he got his ass handed to him by the Iranians.
Do you agree with that, Ray? That assessment?
Yeah, except for the Epstein factor. Uh, this is speculation, but for months I've been suspecting that the Netanyahu really has blackmail material on Trump that is making Trump obey what Netanyahu wants. I mean, if you look at the end of February, it's very stark what happened. There were negotiations. The foreign minister of Oman was mediating them. This was between Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, and the two real estate agents, Witkoff and Kushner. But there was progress. 26, they met, and there was incredible progress. And how do I know that? Because the Omani foreign minister was there mediating, and he was just elated. He gets on his private jet, flies over the Atlantic. On the 27th, he says, I got to tell you the good news in the White House. And they let him talk with J.D. Vance, okay? Now, his reaction, that is, Vance's reaction, was not quite satisfactory to this foreign minister. So he calls up, what's her name, Margaret Brennan, and says, hey, I got to tell you this good news, okay? We're this close. We even have arrangements where there'll be inspections, on-site inspection, maybe even U.S. inspectors will be allowed. It's going to work. I'm so elated. And he tells this in public to Margaret Brennan. That was the 27th. On the 28th, what happened? Well, to hear Marco Rubio tell us, the Israelis decided to attack Iran, and we thought that the Iranians might retaliate against us, the U.S., and so we moved to a preventive stance and make sure that we attacked them so that when they attacked us, it wouldn't be so bad in terms of casualties. So, in effect, Netanyahu made us do it. And then a couple of weeks later, you have this Joe Kent, deputy to the National Intelligence Director, saying, look, I quit. There was no imminent threat. And besides, the real reason was Israel prompted this thing and its allies within Washington. 2 weeks later, he said, look, no ceasefire, nothing's going to work unless you stop giving Israel the arms it needs to continue this kind of stuff. Whew, wow. Just in bullet form. So what I'm saying here is that, my God, here is Trump. He was susceptible to Mossad when Mossad briefed him, said this is going to be a cakewalk. Is he going to be able to work out some sort of a deal where it's not an utter defeat, but it won't require him to renew the hostilities? My guess is he will be able to, if only because of the international pressure to get the street reopened. And the saving grace, if you can look at it this way, is I think that the Russians and the Chinese, as well as the Iranians, will see enough merit in giving enough lipstick to put on this pig of defeat so that Trump can say, inter alia, look, I prevented I prevented the Iranians, so to get a nuclear weapon. Okay. Now, what else? Well, there may be a segue from what we were talking about before to now, because I'm convinced that the Russians are giving the Iranians all the, not all, but sophisticated weaponry that they can use to defend themselves. Would it be an ironclad defense? No. But there's a new factor here. I think Russia and China are together as never before, and both of them, and in particular Russia, I believe is giving Iran what it needs to resist in extremis, and that neither Russia nor China is going to let Iran fall to whatever the U.S. and Israel can throw at it, save the possibility that Netanyahu in extremis might be tempted to use some nuclear weapons rather than go completely down. So that's my guess on all that. In other words, there's the factors I don't quite understand that work on Trump. Trump is by definition inconsistent and mercurial. And what would he be tempted to do? I don't know. He's been tempted and succeeded in doing a lot of stupid things. Would he continue? I hope not. I hope that Scott is right. And I think there are ways out where he can somewhat gracefully say, well, I didn't win it all, but I at least got the straits back open and I prevented. Well, look here, Iran has signed on this paper. They're not going to get a nuclear weapon. Ha ha. We succeeded. That's my diagnosis for what it's worth.
Yeah, so I was saying, Ray, I agree with you about Epstein because of our interviews with Ari Ben Menashe, who was a senior Israeli military intelligence officer at the time who met Epstein and who knows that Epstein worked for Ehud Barak, who was the head of the Aman, or the Israeli intelligence, national defense intelligence. I don't think Scott necessarily agrees with that, but I think that there's a history, obviously, of blackmail by Israeli intelligence, many intelligence services. So I think there's that, but there's also the issue of I don't think Israel has to even go there right now because they could sabotage this deal by attacking Lebanon, and they've begun that. As soon as it looked like they're getting close to a deal, the U.S. and Iran, the attacks began in this week against Lebanon, and Iran is insisting that Lebanon is part of the deal. So there's Israel has a lot of cards to play there in terms of sabotaging this. Why I don't have a lot of confidence. As Scott said, he doesn't think there's a deal. There's going to be a deal anyway.
Yeah, well, I think Scott is right on that. In other words, um, what amazes me is how principled the Iranian position has been. As I said before, why do they care about the Palestinians or the people who live in southern Lebanon or the other people who live in occupied territories? Well, they do. Okay. They're not cynical. This arc of resistance is real. Okay. The Gulfies, those kingdoms, they could care less about the Palestinians. But for some strange reason, I think it's a meritorious reason, the Iranians do, the Iranians. Okay. Now, while the Iranians will assist that Lebanon is included, and they have to their credit. Okay. Uh, then the Israelis always have the option of putting the kibosh on any settlement by doing what they're doing precisely as we speak.
Yeah.
So that would argue in favor of Scott's diagnosis that this thing's just going to go on without any real settlement, and it may not be as brutal as it has been, but the Israelis can and will try masterfully to put the kibosh on any agreement that is reached.
And leave it to Ben Gvir to say out loud what what Netanyahu won't, which is that Israel will not allow the United States to end this war against Iran. He just said it right away. They won't allow it. I
He
wanted
said
to ask,
that in public.
he said that, yeah, this week
In public.
in public,
Yeah.
on the record, in the newspapers. So we know. I want to bring up this Pollock, the American Israeli spy. Were you at the agency when that happened, Ray, or was that after you'd left already?
No, I was there for part of that.
Uh-huh.
Pollard is his name.
Pollard, right.
Yeah, Jonathan Pollard.
Mhm.
I've watched a couple of clips. He's off his mind there. But you know what really bothers me is he was able to get away with what he did, and our security procedures were not at all airtight, or even they were very porous. And then, of course, our ambassador in Tel Aviv have welcomed this spy, who revealed probably more than any other U.S. spy to the Israelis and other people the Israelis gave it to. So, yeah, he's making really strange sounds, but he's a strange cat. And my God, just look. Do you have those clips, Joe, or have you seen them?
I have seen them. Yeah, he's saying that Israel will have to fight Egypt and Turkey next once Iran is taken care of. But Pollard, I understand that the people in the agency were really, really angry because he endangered some CIA agents. Is that correct? And that's not like the kid's glove treatment of Israel didn't work in his case, as far as the agency was concerned. Is that
Yeah, the
right?
agency was able to prevent him from getting off scot-free or being exchanged, as many presidents wanted to do,
Right.
by to help the Israelis assuage them. Uh, he was in naval intelligence. I'm not quite sure that he had much information on CIA agents. I think Hansen may be the
Hmm,
person you're thinking of, the
I
FBI
see.
spy, who is equally. You know, what happened when Bill Casey came in and Bobby Gates, we're talking when Reagan came in 1980, professionalism, even in the Office of Security, which was always very professional in my experience, was thrown to the winds. They put in hacks because they would just say they would salute to Casey and Gates, and professionalism went out the window. And that, I think, is largely why there's even the disciplines of tight security eroded during those days. I don't know what it's like now, but it doesn't look very good because that guy who stole all those all those bars of gold, for God's sake, and pretended to have graduated from such and such, and they didn't even catch it on the on the application. I mean, it's really, yeah, it's almost laughable if it weren't so strange.
Hmm.
I hope they get this guy and put him away for a while. I wouldn't be even tempted to get gold bars and put them in my basement, for obvious reasons. Well,
Pollard may be like Revere saying the truth out loud because if the Great Israel Project is succeed, they might have to be eventually war against Egypt and Turkey. And
yeah,
this
and
is
they're
what
talking
they
about
would
war
want,
against,
right?
yeah, and war against Turkey too, if I recall
Yeah.
correctly what Paul said. I mean,
Which, Scott, would be really a lot to chew for the Israelis, wouldn't it, to take on a NATO army like Turkey? It's crazy.
Like the Turks who like to fight. I mean, they would not. Yeah, but back to Pollard. Just so people understand what happened. Yeah, he was naval intelligence, but that was back in the day when you could gain access to documents that today you might not be able to gain access to because of need to know kind of thing. He gave away the what's called the Raisin Manual, 10 volumes. Um, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't even be allowed to say this. That's how sensitive this was. But basically, these 10 volumes was the complete knowledge base of global frequencies, signals frequencies that we had collected. Every frequency, what it did, what intelligence came from it. Um, so this manual it cost billions of dollars to assemble using the most sensitive technologies available to the United States. some cases involving human intelligence, because again, sometimes there's only certain ways to get certain frequencies exploited. And he gave this to the Israelis. Um, and then the Israelis turned around and sold this to the Soviets because the Israelis wanted to get favorable treatment of the Jews coming out of Israel. He also gained access to the deep cover something. It's a human intelligence thing, but basically it was a document that described how we handled deep cover sources. To just, without giving the name, it gave away enough information that a smart person could figure out who it was. And believe me, intelligence services around the world are pretty smart. But how we protected these sources, the methods, and so when a reporting came in, what would have to be done to the reporting so you could get to certain areas. It basically told how we handle human intelligence and the different assets we have, where they are and what they do. He gave that to the Israelis, and the Israelis sold that to the Russians, to the Soviets. And that may have cost some lives because some of those deep cover assets worked in the Soviet Union. And I do agree that Hansen, but Hansen was FBI. He gave away the FBI's guys, but this one was the CIA's deep cover thing. Pollard is not a good man, and Israel is not a good country for doing this. Israel is not our friend. Israel doesn't care about the security of the United States of America. Israel has always been using the United States of America to further Israeli interests. So, when we have what happens today, where the United States Congress has passed a bill that equates Israeli military service with American military service in terms of veterans benefits, that's just appalling. And now we have the National Defense Authorization Act talking about creating programs of joint defense development that allow Israel to get into. We're making it easy for Israel to spy on us because now they can literally join in and gain access to all of our technology. We always knew that the Israelis were the number one spies. We always knew the Israelis were trying to do this. Is why when I worked with Israel in 1994 to 1998, the CIA and the FBI were appalled by it because even though I was doing it on behalf of the United Nations, it was limited scope and scale, focus. They didn't trust the Israelis for cause. They're like they called me naive. I said, well, look, my job isn't to protect American secrets because I don't know any American secrets. My job is to find out where Iraqi weapons of mass destruction are, and Israel is working with me to help this happen. So on that, the Israelis did a good job, but the CIA did not trust them as far as they could throw them, and the FBI didn't trust them as either for a reason, because of Jonathan Pollard and others. The Israelis run agents. The things Israel did, they've put bugs in the White House. And when I say bugs, I don't mean cockroaches. I mean listening devices. They've wired up all around the White House. They have full spectrum coverage. They're not good people. They aren't our friends. They're not our allies. They only do what they want to do when it benefits them. They do nothing that benefits us without being a two-way street.
A former employee of Los Alamos gave me a tour of the place once, and he told me when he worked there, whenever an Israeli high official arrived, they just had the run of the place. They could go around and get whatever they wanted, basically. The nuclear site in Los Alamos. I want to end by going back briefly to Ukraine. Robert Perry, our founder of Consortium News, was one of the first to write extensively about the problem of the neo-Nazis, Azov, etc., in Ukraine. And he pointed out that even though they only got 2% of the vote in the parliament, this wasn't the issue. The issue was that extra parliamentary influence and outsized influence in Ukraine. And we were attacked by NewsGuard and others for saying that this was a lie, that there were no neo-Nazis basically in Ukraine. It was a small problem, even though Atlantic Council itself had written a piece about the problem of for example, in the Atlantic Council hates Russia more than anyone. So last week, the remains of Andrei Melnik, who was the head of OUNM, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism, was split with Bandera, and that was the OUNB, and Melnik was the head of OUNM. Now, Bandera, after the war worked with the MI6. The Americans didn't want anything to do with him. They worked with a guy called Mykola Lebed, who was a deputy of Bandera. And that's when the U.S. began their long association with neo-Nazis inside Ukraine, Soviet Ukraine first, and then later on, all the way up to the coup of 2024, an unbroken chain. So now, this idea that there are no neo-Nazis, or it's really minimal, I think has to be put to rest once and for all, because none other than Vladimir Zelensky was at this burial of Melnik, who was returned from Luxembourg, I believe, to be reburied with honors in a cemetery outside Kiev, and he's being honored just the way Bandera is. And they march every day on January 1st, which is the birthday, New Year's Day of Bandera. There's a torchlight march in Kiev and probably in Lvov and other places too. Scott, what is your take on what was your reaction to this reburial of Melnik and Zelensky being there?
I mean, it just proved everything I've been saying, everything Robert Perry talked about, everything you've been saying, everything anybody who knows anything about Ukraine has been saying, that this country has been hijacked by Western Ukrainian nationalists who have their pedigrees, who are the descendants of the OUN, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, either the Bandera wing or the Melnik wing. But either way, they're Nazi collaborators who killed Jews, who murdered Poles, who murdered Russians. These are the worst human beings on the planet. These are really, truly awful people. And then the CIA, of course, everybody said, oh, the CIA, you can't prove the linkage. The CIA is the one that said that they could work with Melnik. They couldn't work with Bandera. They worked with Melnik. And, they're the ones, who provided the end to the displaced persons camps in Germany that became the recruiting center. They're the ones that allowed the Banderas and Melnik diasporas, mainly Bandera, by the way, to come in and take hold in Ukraine or in Canada, in the United States, 60 miles away, Ellenville, New York. There's a nice little Banderist get together every year. They have a school that they praise the heroes, and they parade in brown uniforms and torchlight ceremonies and carry portraits of Bandera. If we get into the Ukrainian Congress, the Banderist seized control of that in the 80s, and then infiltrated into the Reagan administration, and today have a firm hold. When you speak of Ukrainian policy in the United States government, it's policy that's dictated by the Banderist wing of the OUN. And these are the ones that, worked with Victoria Nuland and other. Victoria Nuland is a derivative of this very process we're speaking of. These are people who, the CIA worked with and worked with continuously. The CIA funded these people up until 1990. Then after that, they turned it over to the USAID, who continued to fund them. It was the CIA, the State Department, USAID, that helped create the conditions. The 2014 didn't happen in a vacuum. It started in 2000, well, it started long before that, but 2004 was the first time they sought to seize power, the nullification of the Russian political wing of Ukrainian politics. Viktor Yanukovych won the election. They decided he didn't win the election, had another election. He won that one. So they said, no, we're going to go unconstitutional third time around. And they got the result they wanted. Yushchenko, first thing Yushchenko did is make Bandera a national hero of Ukraine. Now, fortunately, his corruption and his incompetence allowed Yanukovych to reemerge in 2010, despite what the CIA did. The CIA said this is unacceptable. We can't have Yanukovych in here. We can't have the Russians in power politically. So 2014 came, the final solution, so to speak, of Ukraine's Russian problem. This was to empower Victoria Nuland's people. Yats is my boy. Yats is my boy, she said. Yatsenko. So we pretend these things didn't happen. And Victoria Nuland, when confronted by Mearsheimer and Walt the other day, said, oh, those are Russian talking points. Well, they're Russian talking points because you were intercepted. And it's the truth. I mean, Russian talking points doesn't mean that it's a lie. It probably means that it's the truth. But you can't handle the truth, so you call it a Russian talking point. But this just proves that everything we said was right. Because now what's happening here is that Zelensky, as I told you, he's in trouble. So he has to now totally align himself with these fanatics. And so the reburial of these remains was that no, look what happened. Poland is just having a freak out right now. They gave him the Order of the White Eagle or something like that. Some great Polish award because Zelensky, of course, is Winston Churchill of our day, the greatest man, the greatest thing since democracy. Except that he buried the man who's responsible for the Volyn massacres, 100,000 Poles slaughtered by these horrific OUN people. And so the Poles are going to take the order back because you can't drape a Polish award over the neck of somebody who is admiring and basically hero worshiping the perpetrator of the Volyn massacres. But this is Ukraine. This is why people get upset me, probably with cause, because I probably should be a little bit more compassionate. But I say that I have no sympathy for anybody in Ukraine today because at this stage of the conflict, you have to know what's going on. You have to understand who is governing you. And to say that I am powerless is not an excuse because no matter how weak you are, you can't support this. You can't support a government that is resurrecting the memory and the legacy of Melnik.
Israel, by the way, also condemned, believe it or not, Ukraine for doing that and condemned Zelensky for reburying him. Ray?
Well, I just remind folks, since I'm so old, that we were after the Russians, we were after the communists, and anything was okay if they were anti-Russian, anti-communist, and that went, of course, for the Ukrainians as AUN group. There was stay-behind operations for many, many years. Scott mentioned 1990. If memory serves, I think the Soviet Union imploded around that time. But inertia keeps going. There's still Russians and the Russians. Now we still have to move against the Russians. When the Atlantic came out with a fairly good story about neo-Nazis there, so did the New York Times. And all of a sudden, like 2 years later, nobody don't see anything about Nazis in Ukraine anymore. So it's a public problem too with the media. Russian talking points. That's why I have the media at the end of the Mickey Mouse. Uh, After the overthrow of the Yanukovych in February of 2014, there was a week later, I got a call from Democracy Now, Amy Goodman's folks, and said, would you come and talk? We have another person. He's a Yale professor, and he knows about Ukraine, and he's going to talk to you about it. My God, I can't remember his name right now. You'll probably remember it right offhand, Scott.
Timothy Snyder?
What? Yeah, Timothy Snyder, right? Professor of political science. Okay. Now he knows a lot about Ukraine, but he's sort of become a Ukrainian too. Anyhow, this is what happens. This is indicative here. Um, Uh, we start talking, and Amy Goodman introduces both of us, and I didn't know who this guy was from Adam. And we talk about this coup, and Professor Snyder says, "What coup?" And I say, "You know the coup that happened on the 14th of February, just 3 weeks ago." And he says, "Oh no, no. Well, what do you mean a coup?" I said, "Well, maybe have you not heard?" Uh, Noland and Ambassador Pyatt in that intercepted conversation, where they're planning the coup, naming the new guy who's going to be coming in and everything. And you know what he says? He says, "Is that all you got?" And I was so taken aback. And of course, Amy jumped in so I didn't have a chance to say, "You need more?" I mean, I've been around for a while. I know what a coup looks like, but never in my whole life have I seen a coup advertised on YouTube on the 4th of February to be carried out not until the 14th. I mean, that's the way it went down, for God's sake. So anyhow, the media is the fly in the ointment here, and there was a good example of how this guy still is very well respected, so to speak, in these professorial media and academic circles. That's why we have Mickey Matt with the media and the think tanks at to the end. So yeah, it's really, if I were Irish, I would get angry.
Yeah, good thing you're not, Ray. So, this guy Melnik and Bandera, they killed thousands and thousands of Jews. But it doesn't matter because Zelensky's Jewish, so he's okay. Remember that?
Right.
And this is only Jewish, this is only Russian propaganda. Thank you, Ray McGovern, for 2.5 hours of your time almost, and Scott Ritter as well. We appreciate you spending this time with us and going deep into all of these issues. I want to thank Kathy Vogan, our producer, our audience for watching us. Please subscribe to this channel. We're in our spring fund drive as well. We have a Patreon page where you can donate directly to CN Live, or go to our website, consortiumnews.com, and hit the red donate button. Once again, for everyone at CN Live, we're saying until next week, goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.